I'll start here. So, anybody watching, and certainly the two of us, have a firm understanding of where these institutions stand in terms of football. We know who's good, who's not good, all of that. Oregon is the best commodity when it comes to football playing on the field. They get the best roster now. They've been the best football program in the Pac-12 for the past 5 to 10 to 12 years. Okay, we know what that is. And then we kind of, like you, figure, okay, not just with the football prowess on the field, but with the brand that they've become, with the uniform and everything that's known about Nike/Oregon, that they must be the most attractive product on the field. I went through all the TV ratings for the 2021 season involving all the Pac-12 contenders for Big Ten membership, meaning Cal, Stanford, Oregon, Washington, Utah, Colorado, Arizona State. Oregon had more people, and I excluded the postseason, of course. I just made it the 12-game regular season. Oregon had more viewers than anybody in the Pac-12 by far, or out of those contenders, not USC, UCLA. Now, that was buoyed by the Ohio State game, which drew almost 8 million people. But still, even without that, Oregon's aggregate number for TV viewership for the entire season was over 33 million. Next closest, Washington was at 12.5 million. Utah and Stanford were about 10 million, just under 10 million. And then it really dropped off with Cal because they were basically relegated to the Pac-12 network for the entire season, excluding like 4 games. But obviously, I introduced that and put it within context that this is just one season. And obviously, when Stanford was much better 7, 8, 10 years ago, playing on ABC more regularly and having those kind of, and that dictates a lot of it, not just how good the team is, but because they're good, they're obviously playing in the better TV windows on the bigger networks. But so that surprises me based on those numbers. And again, that's just one season, but still Oregon tripling Stanford's output more so than tripling their output, at least for this particular season. That doesn't even take into account going to a Pac-12 championship game and then playing in a fairly high-tier bowl game. The other portion of that is you brought in to play the San Francisco-San Jose market, which I believe is 6th in the nation, Portland, Oregon at 21. And then there's some smaller markets that obviously play into that as well. So that's a gap, but it's not monumental. So I'm surprised by that as well. We know what Stanford brings academically and how that fits into the equation. But, you would think the Big Ten hierarchy of academic tier would love to draw on that Stanford endowment and just the prestige of having Stanford. You link them up with Northwestern, et cetera. It would just be a tremendous get. And then if they can just be competent in football, then that would be icing on the cake, probably.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit more about Stanford because, while we're waiting for the Notre Dame, Oregon, and Washington dominoes to fall, those seem to be the first few dominoes that are going to fall in this process. And that's not a guarantee. That's not like an ironclad statement, but that seems to be the way things are leaning right now. If we presume, and I'm not presuming, but like if we accept the hypothetical, if we play along with the hypothetical that Oregon and Washington go to the Big Ten, then Stanford becomes the epicenter of the Pac-12 and its bid for survival, because Stanford would really have a choice to make. Like, do we want to put all our Olympic sport athletes on the same travel schedule that USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington would? Or, and precisely because Stanford has that enormous endowment, does Stanford say, you know what? We don't value football that much. Like, we're not going to sacrifice everything for television money and football cash. We're content to have an Olympic sports style athletic program. We'll stay right where we are. And, if we're part of a Pac-12 that becomes a glorified Mountain West with Boise State, San Diego State, maybe a couple other schools, maybe Gonzaga for basketball only, maybe St. Mary's for basketball only, that's fine. Like, Stanford would be in a position where, like, it doesn't have to make a desperate play for cash, and it could just choose a downscaled existence. It could do what, the Ivy League did in 1981, moving from, Division I down to Division I AA. You know, the Ivy League used to be obviously a very prominent college football conference, but it accepted a lower status. Like those schools did not need the money from competing at the very highest level. So if Oregon and Washington do leave for the Big Ten, and again, no one should assume that at this point, but if that happens, you know, what Stanford wants really could be the determinant about whether the Pac-12 dies or whether it gets reconfigured in a different form. Stanford really becomes a very central player, and so you know that involves a whole new host of challenges for George Kliavkoff as he tries to save not only the conference, but he's fighting for his job, because if there's no Pac-12 conference, well, then there's no Pac-12 commissioner. So it's really going to be interesting to see how that plays out.